Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and enjoyed these stories. If you want early access, then check out the Patreon in the description and make sure you check out the podcast in the description below. Take care and have a great day. And I'd like to share this quickly before the story starts. If you're struggling with either mental health or other issues in life, I think it's very important to stay on top of your thoughts. When we lose track of that, we let our mind take control of us and we can spiral downwards negatively very easily. It's a very difficult thing to do, and there's always going to be a few thoughts that slip through the net. But if you can consciously try and make an effort to make sure they stay positive, it can make a massive difference. So I hope that can help someone, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Take care. Now, my father had worked as a ranger for a long time. He said he absolutely loved the job, and he still talks about it today. For a long time he was trying to get me to follow in his footsteps, but I prefer science, so it was never going to be a job for me. He would always share experiences when I was growing up. Never scary ones, just ones that a kid might be interested in. However, he did tell me about one experience that really changed my mind about the job and what he saw. He actually waited until I was much older, literally 1 year ago, to tell me because he was worried how much it might scare me. And to be honest, it's understandable. So my father told me about one particular winter that he was working. He said he actually enjoyed it because he thought the forest looked absolutely beautiful in the winter. He said he always found peace and loved to read in the moonlight. I told him it was bad for his eyes, and he said, yeah, that's probably why I can barely see now, and we both laughed at this. He also said too, because of the snow, it would actually reflect most of the moonlight so you could actually see quite well. He said that often he would be stationed where there were a very few residents around. He would have a few call-outs, but not as many as normal. Usually they'd just get called to search for people that gone missing in the snow. Now this was good and bad because you could see footsteps, but they would quickly disappear. And this one particular night was no different. My dad said that he spent the first while just reading like he normally did, and just looking at the trees and appreciating them. He said he loved the way you could see the moonlight casting a shadow, as though you're being watched constantly by the trees as they move with the moonlight. I think myself I would have found this pretty scary, but my dad insisted it was peaceful. He said he was having regular contact with his friends over their radio, which was in the cabin near where he was stationed at. He said he would go inside there and would read even more. Now this story took place about 20 years ago, so there wasn't that many things to do to stay entertained like you have now. Now my dad said while he was reading, he kept hearing a strange owl-type sound outside that he couldn't exactly figure out where it was coming from. He said he tried his best to figure it out, but he was sure it was just some animal he hasn't seen before. He decided to step out at one point to try and figure out where the sound was coming from. He still couldn't really see anything, so he thinks it's just his mind playing tricks on him. He doesn't want to read now though. He says this goes on for about another 3 minutes on and off. He says it's really weird. He said it sounds like an owl's directly on top of the cabin, but every single time that he goes outside he can't actually see anything there. Getting agitated, he decides to climb up the side of it with a small ladder. It probably wasn't the best idea because how cold it is and the danger to fall off, but he has to know what this is. He begins climbing up when he realizes something's knocked the bottom of the ladder. Strangely, it actually helped support him as he went up, so he thought that was odd but continues on. He looks up and he can't see a thing. No Santa Claus, he said to himself as a joke. Yeah, my dad's still really bad at jokes. It's a little odd he can't see footprints, but maybe the creature's up in some of the trees where he can't see it. He said the strangest thing is that every single time that he goes outside and tries to look for it, it stops. Convinced it's an animal, he decides to go in again. My dad had a few things that were stressing him out in his personal life, and he doesn't really want to bother himself with any other added stresses especially because he's already on job, and decides to not bother investigating regardless if he hears the sound or not. Fortunately, he didn't have to, as he didn't hear it again. My dad has to do a quick patrol in the area, so heads out. He decides to bring his book just in case he has to stop anywhere for a little while. Now my dad says that he felt very peaceful when he stepped out. Nothing was off, and everything was very scenic. He said it looks like you're in a winter wonderland sometimes when you're out in the forest like that, but you have to make sure you keep moving because you will die of the cold if you stay still for too long. With this in mind, my dad sets out on his patrol. He goes through the tree line. Now my dad only sees it for a second, but he's sure he saw a person up ahead of him, quickly darting through the trees. He looks to the side, then back up to where this thing is again and can't see anything. He's pretty sure that it's his mind, just getting carried away with the night, but it does worry him a little bit. Deciding that it's probably nothing and he should investigate, he continues going up ahead where he saw this thing. He continues trudging through the snow with only the crunching of the snow beneath his feet to keep him company. He gets to exactly where this thing is and he can't see anything. He can see a winter fox, which is extremely rare apparently and something he's never seen before. It kind of looks like a normal fox but white. My dad realizes this is extremely strange because they shouldn't be in the area that he's in. He turns around to look for more, but he realizes the creature's gone. My dad stays there for a minute and actually becomes a little worried and decides to head back to the cabin. Now, he's rather concerned that something's a little off. Playing it down to himself, he decides to trace his steps back to his cabin. He's also getting a bit cold now because he stopped so much and he really needs to pick up the pace, so that's what he does. The walk back is uneventful, and again he finds peace as he can see the top of the cabin light through the tree lines. He makes his way over and stops. Something's off again. He's sure that he left the ladder completely up so he could go up the cabin again if he wants to, but now it's laying in its side. Also, what's weird is there seems to be footsteps around it that aren't his own. But there was some fresh snow, so that could have caused it. He decides to put the ladder back where it's supposed to be and head inside. The second he does so, he gets a call out that they have to look for a missing person who's got lost kayaking or camping. My dad thinks, great. Just as I think this can't get any worse or more strange, I have to go back out there again. Plus I'm not even that warm. He decides to quickly make a coffee so he can keep himself warm. Not just from drinking it, but from keeping the bottle under his coat so he can use that to keep his body warm. He grabs his biggest coat he has and he heads out now. He has to go in essentially the opposite direction that he come from. He decides he's going to keep a hiking pace and now he's focused on his job. He sets off into a darker area of the forest now, where the tree cover's a lot stronger. Luckily the snow's not as deep here, so my dad can make his way through quite easily. My dad said the whole time he was just thinking of being back home with his wife and family, because as much as he enjoys the job, he admitted that he does have some days where he really doesn't know what to think of the job when he gets scared on his own. Again, something he only revealed a lot later to me. As my dad's walking, he realizes that the snow's got lighter and lighter to the point that there's virtually none around him on the ground. It's still in the trees, but not much. The forest seems to be getting impossibly dense now. My dad said it actually worried him a bit because it actually become almost like true pitch black darkness at times. But again, he has to keep looking for this person. In this new part of the forest, my dad said that he can't see any signs of life. He's coming up to the edge of where he needs to search and he's actually angry he can't find somebody. He knows that it's only a matter of hours before somebody could either fall unconscious or die of hypothermia, so he needs to continue the search as quickly as possible. Just as he stops, he realizes that the forest is a little too quiet. He's been calling out for signs of anyone, but no one responds. He's standing there in silence, trying to hear for anything when a loud thud happens next to him. He looks to his left, and a huge tree branch has fell right next to him. He quickly moves away in case any more fall. My dad says this is something that occurs naturally, but he was a little concerned. He decides to quickly hurry up his search now, and picks up the pace again, hiking in a big circle. My dad tries to get onto the radio, but he can't get through to anyone. He realizes that the trees have got so thick, almost impossibly, that he can't get any reception at all. He's actually a little frustrated now and realizes he probably needs to get back, because he doesn't want to be lost out here either. He would have a good idea of what to do, but he never really wanted to put this into practice. This is something else my dad explained to me. Even if you're the most experienced outdoors person, you never really want to be lost out there on your own, because anything could go against you, anything could happen. So he continues on. As he's doing so, he can hear a strange screaming sound coming from what must be miles away, but strangely from all directions. My dad said that he's never heard anything like it. He's actually worried it's a pack of animals hunting him, so he stops dead. Just as he does so, he realizes that the sound seems to stop for a few seconds, then comes even closer. In between the sound stopping, there's some kind of thumping sound on one of the trees further away. My dad calls out, "Hey, I'm a ranger looking for you. Where are you?" Just as he does this, a strong wind picks up, and the thumping sound seems to be coming from all directions. My dad says he's very freaked out now and realizes something's off. He decides to continue the search at the quickest possible pace now, continuing the loop back to where he started. The forest is still far too dense and something's just off. He realizes too that the sound seems to be following him. He knows the sound isn't a human sound, so he knows he's not got to look for the person in this area because they can't possibly be, or he would have found them by now. He tries again to radio this in, but there's no response. Just static. My dad starts to jog now because he knows that if he doesn't move, something bad's gonna happen. He has to stop for a moment to figure out his bearings because he's lost. He has no idea exactly where he is, and he can't see the moon now because of the tree cover. Out of the corner of his eye, he can see a faint red glow. He turns to his left and he can see two red glowing orbs that he realizes are eyes just off in the distance. He said it was probably about 20 feet away, but around it is a completely black tall figure. It was impossibly tall, like 7 feet or so. It's impossible to be a person, and he doesn't know what to do. He's completely frozen there. He's never seen anything like this in his life. He says he can see some yellowish colours too, as he realises whatever this thing is baring its teeth at my dad. He doesn't need a second longer. He drops his flashlight and begins sprinting in the opposite direction. My dad says that in all of his years of doing this job, he's never seen anything like this before. He doesn't know where he's running to, and he can hear this thing just slightly behind him, not chasing him but hitting trees. What is this thing? He thinks to himself. My dad then sprints as fast as he possibly can until he has to stop again to catch his breath. He's glad that this thing isn't near him, and he stops again as he realizes that he's come into the normal part of the forest. He starts walking now, convincing himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him, when he hears that awful sound again. The knocking on the tree, but closer this time. He looks to his left and he can see two glowing eyes met by another pair, then another, then another. My dad said it's impossible to tell because how scared he was, but there must have been at least 6 or 7 of these things. He rubs his eyes and screams what the hell is happening, and sprints back to the area that he knows. He runs as quick as he can, and he can't actually hear the thumping now because his heart's beating so loud in his ears. He turns one last time as he realizes he's found the cabin. He can just about see the light just in front of him. He jogs over there, but he can't stop but look behind himself one more time. As he turns, he realizes just at the start of the dense tree line, all of the eyes are still watching him, until they all go to black. My dad continues until eventually he gets back into the cabin, quickly slamming the door behind him. He gets onto the radio and starts explaining what he saw, but stops and says, "Sorry, what I meant to say is I've had a look and I can't find the person. They say no worries, we've just found him about an hour ago." My dad then looks at the clock and realizes that he's been out there for at least 4 hours. He says it's impossible because he was convinced that he was only out there searching for at least 30 minutes. But the time can't possibly be wrong. My dad said that he didn't get a wink of sleep that night. He still felt as though he had adrenaline in the morning and felt absolutely drained. Apparently when he come home, my mum said what was wrong with him and he looked as though he'd seen a ghost, but he refused to tell her what happened. He still did to this day. My dad doesn't know what to think of the experience, and he actually moved us to another state after that. He never explained why to the family, only recently to me, and I don't know what to make of the experience. I know there's things out there that we don't understand. My dad was such an experienced ranger too, and everything else that happened in his career was so normal, but this one thing, it gives him and me nightmares to this day. I asked my dad what he thought it was, and he said he doesn't know. It was just some kind of forest creature that was letting him know that he was in their territory and he should never have been. My dad doesn't understand too how the forest was so silent. There's always something you can hear, but everything didn't make sense in that moment. He's never found that part of the forest too where there was no snow on the ground and the trees were so dense. He's still not sure what to make of it. He doesn't like to think of it, and there's some dense parts of the forest that he'll never go to this day. Even though we're in a different state, he's that scared of it. A few weeks back, I posted on a thread about rural hauntings, cryptid encounters and folklore. I figured this would be a great time to share my experience. So we're from a small town in southern Ohio, about an hour east of Cincinnati. This town has been plagued with people dying young, and in some pretty gruesome ways. There's a lot if you just do a Google search. There is a section of woods that seems to have concentrated activity throughout. The woods in question are surrounded by 2 churches, a hospital, and an area of housing. Now, as full disclosure, things do not happen every time we go in, but when they happen, things go off the charts. The most common thing that we've experienced is that we're dubbed the geeks. We call these geeks because they are tall, sometimes 12 feet, and gangly and move awkwardly, and they move between trees swiftly. They never present themselves outwardly, only glimpses of them as they move through the trees. The scariest thing about them, however, is the sound they make, like a deep groan, just before they start moving. Now there's one other creature too, Hydra. Only one of us has ever seen this thing, and so far, there's only ever been one witnessed. It's a small primate-like creature with a face like a hideous woman, a chimpanzee body, long greasy black hair, and boils on its back, which are red. The member of our group that's encountered this thing refuses to tell us how it went. I had to go down to visit my friend at his college in Virginia, US. We had hung out on campus until like 3 a.m. and decided to go for a walk. We walked through along a path and wound up in some woods. My friend insisted that this was a shortcut back to campus. We entered the woods and walked for about a mile, only with our phone flashlights on. Just as we ceased at the hill, we see something. Originally, I thought it was a white owl sitting on a brand of a rotten wooden tree trunk. However, as we walk, my curiosity turns to horror as I discover this isn't an owl. About 20 yards away from us, a white face peeked around the tree. Its face looked as though it's made out of old bone, slightly yellow and cracked. Its shape was a mix of a human's and an elk's, or horse's. Its eyes were sunken into the back of its head. It really appears like they're made out of charcoal. Now, I've never seen anything like this. It had no mouth, no nose, and I stopped and tried to get a better look, but that's when it appeared just over the tree to be glaring at me. Its long arm pulled around as though it's trying to get a better look at us. Its fingers were long and thin like spider legs. It tilts its head and looks over to the other tree. I grab my friend's arm and we run. I've been searching for weeks to try and figure out what I saw, and the only thing I compare it to accurately is a Wendigo. Now, this isn't my story, but happened to my uncle. We live in Utah, and my uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion called Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually they come to a compromisation that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. The reservation wasn't big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night they were trying to sleep when suddenly their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climb under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing in on both sides of the trailer like a group of people. After about 5 minutes it stops. The next day they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and told them they had to leave. They think it's strange but don't think much of it. The next night it happened again. They woke up to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were trying to scare them off. They then go into a convenience store and they're talking and saying how frustrated they are with the situation, and the clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it, it's forbidden." The guy continues to tell them about skinwalkers. He said they're evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out baffled, thinking it was a scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking starts again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, flew it open and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw 3 animals run off. 2's a wolf and 1's a bear, looking strange, almost like they have human features. As he watches them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs and started slowly going towards the tree line, making a human cackling sound. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president the next morning asking to be relocated, and they were that day. For a year nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being located to another city and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they travelled through went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 PM and met Jimmy, and they had to go and leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious, even though that Mark's a bit freaked out. "I'm not kidding. Go do your business." Jimmy insisting he was fine, so they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries when Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You have to hold it." But he can't, so they have to stop, and says, "Please be quick and near the car. You better be fast. Get into the car quick afterwards." With a confused look, Jimmy says, "Alright," opens the door and starts. About 5 seconds later, the president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy's freaking out, saying, "What's going on?" The mission president says nothing and increases the speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car. There's a giant wolf-type creature next to the car on 2 feet. Mark looked at the speedometer and they're going nearly 60. The creature kept up with the car until finally it goes into the trees. Jimmy, shaking, says, "What did I just see?" The president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you do that." I wanted to start off by saying that I'm a 27-year-old and I've never experienced anything like this in my life, and I hope to never experience it again. This happened 3 days ago. It was about 11:30 at night and I was taking my dog out to go to the bathroom. My boyfriend and I live on about 4 acres of land. We have overgrown fields in the distance. It's somewhat near the house but not super close. I was carrying one of those spotlight flashlights. It's so powerful that you can see the beam through the night sky. Now my dog and I were getting so close to the field, so I decided to scan it with the flashlight, and what I saw next terrified me. I saw this creature walking through the field. It had a human-shaped head, but the eyes were nothing like I've ever seen before. They were so big that it appeared to take up most of its face. They glowed in a way that I've never seen before, like a piercing glow. I know that flashlights can create a certain type of reflective glow, but this is different, almost like lights coming from its eyes. Now, I had actually lived in a woodland area, so I came into contact with many animals at night. This was not like any animal I've ever seen before. It's weird because I don't recall seeing a mouth, but I was so fixated on its abnormally large eyes that I probably didn't pay attention to the lower parts of its face. Its eyes were shocked and evil looking. The expression really stood out as being so eerie to me. Now, let's get to the body. It was somewhat human shaped but had an abnormally long extremities. Even though the overgrown field covered most of its body, I can tell the shape of it. Its arms are way too long for its body. I checked out how tall the overgrown grass was the next day and estimated it's 6 feet tall. The way it walks terrifies me, and walking sideways while staring at me really scared me. I have to admit that I got really scared when I lowered the flashlight to the ground, but then I got enough nerve to raise it. It had made its way down the field a little more, but it was still walking sideways and staring at me. Needless to say, I took my dog inside after that and had a mini freak out. I've done a lot of searching online and still can't figure out what this thing was. When I was 15, my father and I loved to go camping. This is something we did whenever we had the opportunity. There was some really good forest around where we lived, full of life and sounds. Probably the most peaceful part for my dad at least was the sounds of the nature. It annoyed me, but my father loved it. It made a difference from the mechanical sounds of the job where he worked. So on one particular evening, We do some fishing. We're having a great time looking up at all the stars. The sun's just beginning to set, and you can just about see the northern star in the hemisphere. We decide to call it a night. Now while we're walking back to our camping site, my dad continually stops, not saying why. Now normally I just make fun of him, but I can see that he has his hand on his gun. I know something is wrong. I don't want to scare my dad and act as though I don't notice anything. Every time that we begin walking, we can hear a sound, louder than our own footsteps, that can't be identified as one specific thing. It's hard to describe, but almost like a deep thud, just beyond your range of hearing, but you can still notice it, if that makes sense. So anyway, we continue towards our camp when my dad suddenly shouts out, "Hey, you stop immediately, I have a gun." I ask my dad what's going on. He tells me to be quiet. He says you take one more step and this is your last warning. And with that, gunfire. There's a few moments of silence before my dad grabs my hand and tells me to run. I don't know what's going on and begin crying in fear. What's more strange is we run past our campsite. We run all the way back to where our car is and speed out of there. He tells me to never tell my mum what happened and that he'll explain one day. Now, as you can imagine, this is the most terrifying experience in my life. Eventually my dad did tell me. He said he thought we were being followed by a very large man, but he eventually caught a glimpse of something in the moonlight. Now it looks like a person, yes, but upon closer inspection, he can tell that it's definitely not a normal person. He describes it to me as a Skinwalker. Now I don't know too much about them, just that they're to be avoided. He said that's when he pulled the trigger. He knows he landed a direct hit on it, or at least within an inch of this creature, and it didn't even move an inch. This is when he made us begin running. So this happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are fuzzy. So it's the summer of 1999. I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old at the time and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mum's home. We spent every moment together that summer. We're a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and sleepovers. We would watch VHS tapes, listen to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we very rarely locked our front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Now behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it. There was a major street that had a gas station, restaurant and hotels and attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened though? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks down the strip to Katie's home. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days, we would go to my home to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we get to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents are out of town. We were gonna have a party. The first few nights, the girls would jump in from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate in this due to my extreme fear of heights. When we got down to the sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist, you know, the one with Linda Blair, I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mum was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money from the movies, then promptly walked down to the strip to get junk food. Now, I wish I could say that we're aware of the surroundings, but we're not. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the home. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents are loaded. They have a huge property with numerous buildings, broken down cars that her dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen and dining and living room. There were no walls and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors front and back. The day was just as planned. We get our junk food and make it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turns on the news. As we're eating, we hear a story about staying inside because there's a report of a suspicious man walking on the strip. That's it, suspicious man. We laugh and joke about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. I don't remember what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings and she storms out of the home. I went after her, opened the front door just in time to see her lighting a cigarette. I sat there with her on a bench while she gone on about the other 2. Suddenly, the air grows thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly ask her if she feels as though she's being watched. She responds with a little nod, and then we're blinded. Someone's in a car in the driveway. My heart's racing as I stood up, pulling Julie out of the spot she seems to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason, but somehow I'm able to get myself and Julie inside. The moment we're inside, the headlights go off. It's pitch black again. I lock the door and turn off the light. By now, Julie has regained her composure to tell the other 2 what's happened. As I frantically check the back door and turn every light off, I tell them to be quiet and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close. I was praying to every god that he would go away. Then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, now frantically. I crawl away from the door. I now move over to where my friends are. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still, listening to this man bang on every window or door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room right next to the 2 windows. I finally got up, gathering the courage to run to the phone. I call my mum. I tell her that we're all alone and someone's trying to breach the house. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden, the banging stops. We sat there listening to him getting in his car. Then, the sound starts again, that turned into a growl. He's gone now. My mum and stepdad then show up, checking out the place. They found tyre tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway. Whoever this was had been watching us for a while. The truly scary part is all the scratch marks on the windows and doors. Clearly not possible for a human to make. This is why I know it was a skinwalker. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents, which of course they didn't believe. Even to this day, I'm certain this was something supernatural and not a normal person. I just hope they never come back to me. My family loves to go on vacation in Sweden, and my grandmother even has a cottage in the forest that all the family members use if they want. A couple of years ago when I was 20, I was on vacation there with my mum and grandma sometime in autumn for about 10 days. This is a Swedish backwoods. We go there to unwind, to enjoy nature and take a rest from civilization. Hiking, canoeing, and looking for stuff, sitting around the campfire, and just them sorts of things. It's not completely isolated. You can find some villages and fields here and there. It's definitely very rural though, so you don't have much of a chance of encountering other people. Now, I've always liked to go exploring on my own, finding out the new paths through the woods, fixing our old maps to reflect the landscape better. The maps you can buy of this area haven't been updated for years, and many paths don't even exist anymore due to overgrowth. What I also like to do is explore old abandoned buildings, and rural Sweden's great for this. Back in the 1800s, Swedish people in the countryside were dirt poor and starving, so many moved to the New World for a better life. You can still find the foundations of farmhouses, even foundations of entire villages in the woods, sometimes with rusted 100-plus-year-old farm equipment. Also, like so many countries, Sweden has an issue with rural exodus nowadays, with middle-aged and young people moving away to cities. Old people stay out there until they die, and no one buys their houses until they're literally just sitting there abandoned. This means a lot, so you can find many empty houses in the forest, and I just love exploring them. Most of them have already been looted, presumably by hunters, loggers or hikers, but sometimes you can find interesting things. Now, one crisp autumn day, I took one of our bicycles, a map, and something to eat and drink. Told my mum and grandma I wanted to be back by nightfall, and at the latest, would be set out to explore there. On the map I had chosen, there's a wide loop that I guess would take about 3 hours if the paths were clear and didn't stop to explore. But even if I did, I guess I had plenty of time until dusk. I had a lot of fun at first, driving the mountain bike down smaller and smaller forest paths, finding foundations of old buildings and some root cellars that were still intact and some mushrooms. I have some problems with the map though. Like I said, many paths that are still on the map don't exist anymore, so I had to turn back a few times, but mostly I had a pretty good idea of where I was. Of course, that made it all take longer than I anticipated, and when I reached the furthest point of the loop and turned into a path that, according to the map, would take me back and add an hour, the sun's already setting now. At this point, I'm already feeling a bit uneasy, I have to admit, because of my bad time management and because I was worried that I could trust the map even less than I thought. And shortly before turning onto the path, I found some traps in the woods that kinda creeped me out. 3 big cages, each with a platform in the middle that was connected to a steel door in front. On those platforms were some kind of animal remains, rotted black things with bones sticking out, etc. But it hadn't been touched, I guess, since the doors were still open. I had taken a stick and deactivated the traps by pushing onto the platform through the cage bars. When the doors had snapped shut, it was so loud that I flinched. Now, as clumsily as I was cycling along on the uneven ground, I realised the sun setting. I had this uncomfortable feeling that everything around me was sort of aware, if that makes sense. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, not quite yet. It just felt like I had to try and be quiet now, somehow. After a while, I came upon a crossroad in a more open area where I was supposed to follow the path straight. The trees were not so high here, and I guessed it had just been one of the clearings created by a severe storm years ago. At that crossroad was a tiny wooden building, somewhere between a shed and a cabin. I had originally set out to find abandoned houses so far, and I've only seen a couple of foundations. So even though at this point I should have turned back, curiosity gets the better of me. I want to check if this was locked and if I could take a peek inside. It's not locked, but the door was kind of stuck in the frame for a moment until I could tear it loose. Inside the cabin was a cot, a tiny oven, a mass of taxidermy animals that I've never seen before. They've even taxidermy animals on the cot and on the oven, now to the walls and ceiling, and the entire inside of the cabin, every inch of it's covered in a layer of black mold. It was so much that some of the animals were there and you couldn't really tell what they were anymore, only guess from the shape. They all looked monstrous covered in that stuff, and the smell was overwhelming. I quickly tried to close the door again, but the wood had warped so much it's not possible, so I left it hanging to get out of there. As I was cycling away from the cabin, I felt so strange. This time, I did feel like I was being watched, and was nonsensely thinking, you should have closed that door. I don't know why I thought that, but it made me uneasy to think the shed door's open. I tell myself I'm being silly, because why would it matter? Obviously no one's using it anymore. And about 10 minutes later, the path entered a stretch of older woods with much higher trees. The sun was now close to the horizon, the skies full of orange light. Under the fir trees, it was already getting very dark. I checked my phone to tell my mum that I'm maybe gonna be late, but there's no reception. A couple more minutes into the dark forest and the path disappeared. At this point, I have 2 options. Try and push through with my bike until I met a logging road that was hopefully on the other side of that stretch of woods and it can take me back, or return, go past the mold shed again and try go back the other way. Basically, the second option was not an option for me. As I already said, I kind of had to zigzag and improvise even to come this far, because the map's wrong in every place seemingly. Going all the way back is a perfect way to get lost out there in the dark. But also, I really don't want to go past the shed again. And now I have a sudden aversion to look behind me. As dusk was creeping through the forest, I was getting really paranoid at this point. The uneasy feeling crystallized into the idea that I've disturbed something there. Because I've left the door open, it's following me. I know it's stupid, but I can't shake the feeling. Going back past the shed, past those traps, and then through the ruins of that old village, past the open mouths of the root cellars in the dark. Getting lost in there with the feeling of something possibly on my trail. No way I'm going back. You might even get lost trying to go through the woods in front of me. And I would have to push, maybe even carry my bike. For the woods don't seem to stretch too far in front of me, only left and right, so it seemed like the better option. I was just hoping at this point the supposed logging road on the other side's still there. After tearing through some barbels for a bit, I found what I guess might be the remnants of the old path, because the ground was sort of lower there, and I tried to follow that until I come upon another set of ruins. The foundations of some farmhouse presumably. Behind that, the ground slopes down into a marshy area, with birches that seem very white in the gloom under the trees. At this point, I stopped to listen. I still don't want to turn around. I couldn't hear anything, but the feeling of being watched, being alone, only increases at this point, and I felt like something was coming for me. But like the forest itself was somehow aware of my presence, listening, watching, like it was being deliberately quiet. I was feeling so scared that I didn't even try and talk myself out of the feeling anymore. I just accept it as what I'm dealing with now. I had some leftover food in my backpack, half a sandwich and some sesame snacks. And then, the mushrooms I found earlier. I took it all out, laying it on a stone, on one of the walls that surrounds the ruins. I then said something along the lines of, "Please let me go, I'm really sorry. I won't come back here again. I just want to go home, please. I'm sorry." Or something along the lines of that. And after that, I grabbed my bike and went down into the swamp, still looking back only partially. Luckily, it turned out it wasn't a large swamp or anything. Really just a wet patch for about 200 meters until the ground sloped downwards again, then upwards. Still, it took a while because of the bike to get out of and really hurt my calves. And I can't really see anymore and was constantly stepping into puddles getting stuck. When I emerged on the other side, I was absolutely soaked in sweat. And my heart is absolutely pounding. And then, wouldn't you know it, the trees opened up, and there it is, the logging road. I could have cried with joy and relief in that moment. I stepped onto the road and turned to look behind me, but I can't even see the swamp through the trees now. It's almost pitch black there, but luckily there's some moonlight, and the light on the bike also worked. I climb on my bike, pedaling home as quick as I can. About half an hour later, I even had some cell phone reception for a moment, so I can call my mum and tell her what happened. Well, I told her I got lost. I didn't want her to know that I worked myself into a panic and got into a dangerous situation, that I had a horrible feeling I couldn't shake of being followed. By the time I arrived to our own cabin, I'm completely exhausted and overwhelmed by what's just happened. It's honestly almost putting me into a state of shock thinking of it. I have no idea what was out there, following me or watching me. I don't know why there were so many taxidermy animals in there and it was full of moss and mould. I can't believe something was out there stalking me in the darkness for God knows how long. I've never had a feeling like it in my entire time out in the wilderness since, or before then. It still gives me nightmares to this day. I was 12 or so at the time. Some friends of mine are in the Girl Scouts and invite me to join them for a sleepover at this old sanitarium in Maine, just north of San Francisco. At this time, 50 years ago now, the building's not in the best of conditions. There was an old caretaker's cabin and some outbuildings. My friend and I wandered around and explored for the first day, Saturday, and well, we're not the best behaved little monsters. In spite of the locked door, we crawled through a window into the caretaker's cabin exploring there. My friend went upstairs and I stayed in the downstairs part as a sentry. Already nervous, I was even more jumpy when I heard someone coming down the stairs, but it wasn't my friend. There was no one there, at least I can see. Now fast forward to one evening. In an attempt to go to sleep, we were overtaken by giggles. Now, one of the counsellors separated us so the others can sleep. I was placed in bed in this little sunroom thing. It was an enclosed room, but with windows on 3 walls. Now, the wall I'm facing actually has a set of French doors and a balcony. Now I'm awoken by a strange sound. It's about 3 in the morning, and everyone else is asleep. I then watch a woman in an old-fashioned dress walk past the doors through to the balcony, look at me, then descend the stairs silently. I figure out it's just a counsellor, until I wake up in the morning and realise that there's no stairs. We explored every acre of that place and never found any signs of where she could have went. And none of the counsellors were up at that time either. Now I'm not one to believe in the paranormal, but I had one experience I simply cannot explain in any other way. So my family owns this old cabin out in the wilderness. It's half derelict, and to be honest, I don't even stay in there because I hate the spiders that I know are above me. I instead sleep outside in my tent. And one night, I'm doing exactly that, thinking, wow, I'm glad I'm in here, not in there with all them spiders and the real danger. At that very moment, I can hear a piano in the background. I think my phone's on, so I go and check it, but it's on charge and there's no sound coming from it. I unzip the tent, and I can see a torch and a white piano. I've rubbed my eyes because this makes literally no sense to me, and this is where the sound's coming from. I pull out my binoculars and sure enough, there's a piano with a torch next to it, and sound coming from it. Hell nah, I think to myself. I look around for people and see no one. I go inside the tent again, going to get my rifle because I'm very scared now. Just as I come into the tent, the sound stops. I come out of the tent and it's gone. Only the torch remains, so it's been knocked over. My dog is absolutely terrified at this point too, so I know something's up. I grab my stuff near my tent and just get the hell out of there with my dog. I've never been back there since, and I still have no logical explanation for this whatsoever. I really wish I had a reasonable answer, but I have none, and I've never seen anything like it. Me and my dad and younger brothers and mum were all staying in this lovely cabin out in the forest one winter. It was close to Christmas time, and we love staying out there. We're a wilderness family, and my dad's big on hunting, so this was a great time for us, and I have a lot of my most fond memories here. Now one night we're staying in the cabin, and my mum just can't sleep. My dad says she's just being paranoid and that she could go back to bed, but she refuses to. Just as I wake up, and my brother does to hear this, we hear an extremely high-pitched sound that we've never heard before, and literally, all of the windows simultaneously blow out on the cabin. My mum and dad don't take a second to react, rush us into the car. My dad gets his shotgun and does a quick sweep around. He can't find anything. I never seen him look so scared, and hops back into the car, and we drive out of there. A few years later we get the windows replaced, but we end up selling the place. When I speak to my mum and dad about it to this day, they still get very scared and say they really don't have an answer for what happened. When I was younger, I used to love go exploring the woods and forest with my friend. Now, we used to have to lie about what we were actually doing, because there's no way in hell that any parents in their right minds are going to let their kids do this. But we were lying and did so anyway. Now we set off like normal one day, and it began to rain heavily. I already slipped on a rock and ended up twisting my ankle, so I wanted to go home. However, my friend, James, wanted to stay out later. I was hesitant but said fine because I had nothing better to get on with. So we're going about exploring when we realise how dark it's getting. Not to worry, we have flashlights. We shine our lights around and hit a dark object. We both focus our lights simultaneously and hey, it's a cabin. It's a really old looking one too. We both look at each other and smile, really excited to go and explore in there. My friend James says as a joke, last one to get there is a loser, and jogs off, and what happens no less than 4 seconds later? Twist his ankle like me. He's in some pain, but I literally cannot stop laughing. I still think it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I eventually catch up with him and say we've really got to get heading home now, but not before we explore in here. As we're doing so, I get this horrible feeling like we're being watched. Something just feels off and I don't know what it is. I get worried maybe an animal's in there, so decide to throw a log in. As I do so, I hear an extremely loud thump sound and snap. It scares the life out of me and I actually fall over. I can't believe you're that scared, man, my friend says to me, and I say sharp. I didn't think the floor was that weak. I threw it through the window, but it also props the door open. And as it does so, to my horror, I can see this place has been booby wrapped with a bear trap, and I've just set it off, and some other trap in the background that I can't actually see. And the feeling of being watched? It's getting worse now. We both look at each other terrified, knowing that we can't even run if we want to. We both link arms and kind of support each other's hurt legs, and get out of there as quick as we possibly can. We both swore never to tell our parents what happened, but looking back on it now, it's absolutely horrifying to think that someone booby-trapped a cabin in the middle of the woods, obviously trying to lure people in. And that was almost us. If it wasn't for some stupid injuries, my friend would have sprinted in there and trapped himself, and God knows what would have happened. or it could have been myself.